Welcome to Almost Pro, the podcast delivering you the untold stories from athletes who almost made it and the experts that guided them. I'm Laura.
I'm Francis, and today we're diving straight into the deep end with a topic that's too often left in the shadows. Do your parents need to be rich for you to make it in sport? What is the true cost of becoming a professional athlete?
I've been thinking about the cost of living and what this means for sport and for the athletes. If we look at it from the parents' perspective, it's trying to juggle, particularly in the economy, really
Mm,
all across the world right now, trying to
mm.
balance working with being able to physically get to the sport and fund that sport. And then if you've got multiple kids, what that looks like.
Preach, Laura.
Yeah, it's a pretty tough gig.
Yeah, and I don't feel like it's the parents that we can even single it out to, right? Like you're looking across the landscape and we know the social benefits of sport, but we're talking about like young adults even and what they're needing to pay for today. Is sport ever going to make it to the top for them? So, and maybe our generations before will argue it's always been the same, but I can tell you sitting in a car park watching my kids at soccer training, and I'm looking around at families going, interesting, it used to be that mum and dad could both be here. And I now know that dad simply cannot finish work at that time anymore or they're not making ends meet. So for me it begs the question right from the very beginning, right? So we round this out and we say, do your parents need to be rich for you to make it pro? Let's start at the beginning of your journey. So at the very beginning, when you're becoming a professional athlete, you've probably been doing that for a long time, playing that sport for a long time, right? You were little when it started. So if I think about the young kid, youngish even kid that is playing a sport, and we can pick any sport you like, the sport then kind of it bookends school because they've still got this structured environment for schooling in most parts of the world, and schooling occupies a good percentage of the daylight hours for children. So someone is getting that child from school to an after school sporting activity, which means they're not working your standard 9 to 5. And there are loads more jobs now that aren't 9 to 5. I get that. But I don't think we can discount that there are also loads of employers who need their people there after 2:30. So someone is finishing work early to get the kid to school. We're paying for the cost of that transportation. If you're living in different parts of the world, and I'm in Australia, I'm in Queensland, I would not say that the transportation network allows for anything other than parental driving. Someone has to be in a vehicle driving that car. They're not getting on a bus, they're not getting on a train. So someone has to be available to make the drive, and they have to own a vehicle to be able to do that. And that is before you're paying for the sport, before you're paying for the kit, before you're paying for the hype. If my kids are playing football and they're following Chelsea, when they're turning up at training, the other kid's got a Chelsea jersey and I don't get to have a Chelsea jersey. And suddenly you're watching this merchandise rollout appear in your bank statements, you know, and then they turn out to be good because you want to make sure then that you can get them into what are privately funded academies. And that is after you've picked up the costs of all things life, of shelter, of food, of every other service. You got to make yourself available and you got to have money in the bank.
Absolutely. I think there's also the issue of time and accessibility. If they are looking like they're pretty good at the chosen sport, do we now need to
Mm.
travel? Is that more time off work? And how does that financially, affect things? I think a lot of people are budgeting really, from day to day, week to week, particularly, if you're juggling sport and kids and all the other costs involved. So
Mhm.
I guess here in the States, I think there's a
Mhm.
lot of the same kind of sentiment as in Australia. There's a lot of the
Right.
same issues of trying to meet those weekly bills and provide those sporting opportunities.
And you don't want your kid to miss out.
No, absolutely not.
And if
Yeah,
they're good, you really don't want them to miss out. Like you
yeah.
want the world to see their talent, right?
Well, if they're
So
good as
you'll do
well,
what it takes.
yeah. I mean, you're going to be burning through equipment, right? Like, so if
Yeah.
they are good,
Yeah.
okay. Well, now we're buying shoes more often, and we're buying the equipment more often, and it's
What
like
if
this
what if they're good
never-ending
and they play
cycle.
tennis, Laura? What if they're good and they play tennis? Like how many rackets are we talking?
Look, I'm just going to make them play another sport. That's way too expensive.
We will not fund a smashed racket, you rogue child.
It's called an elite sport for a reason.
But it's true, right? I mean, not necessarily that our kids are smashing rackets, but it's true that they are going to burn through more if they're using it more. If they're
Yeah.
training multiple times a week, and not to mention the sacrifice on the rest of the family and the, you're out day and night. How are you feeding these kids? You're probably on the road.
Well, see, this is the thing though, right? Like, I guess the kids are seeing this as well. So,
Mm,
as much of
mm,
it being a struggle for their parents, kids are pretty observant. They're
mm.
seeing this as well, and part of me thinks, okay, well, as a player, I know that I was hesitant to ask my parents for another racket after I'd smashed one. I know at the end they just started giving me cricket bats and saying, if you break your racket, you're playing with a cricket bat. It's that hesitancy to say, hey, there's a tournament because
Yeah,
the tournament has an entry fee and it takes time to travel there. And I think kids are feeling this as well across all levels of of whichever sport they're playing, from juniors,
such a good
amateurs
point.
to international. I think they can see what's going on.
I reckon if you cast your own mind back, like I feel like I was pretty young when I recognized the notion of finances in my family home. The conversation, the language around what we can and can't afford, the what was being sacrificed. I feel like I was young when I registered that. I don't know about you.
Yeah, very young. Yeah, like I said, I think kids are pretty aware most of the time. They might
Yeah,
not be
you clock
involved.
it early, right?
You do, yeah, yeah. You might not be involved in the conversations at home about which bill needs to be paid and what the mortgage looks like, but you have an awareness of it.
And and when you're not, when there's other siblings in the makeup and the conversations are about choice and, who's getting this time and who we're paying for that time, I think you recognize that as well. There are cases like Hayley Razzo where she's been really open about not having come from this topic, the reference to rich parents. She's been really open about not coming from that, and her story is beautiful, and her mum is an absolute superstar in everything that she does, and she honors her mum greatly. But her mum sacrificed, she slogged, and then the whole family slogged, and Hayley Razzo has been really open about that too. I think we know Hayley's story because it's not the common story. When we pull a story out like that and we latch onto it and we want to know more about it, it's because it's fairly isolated, because people aren't telling that version, the one that says, and you mentioned Lewis Hamilton. So it's when you pull them out and go, what was the experience for that person? And then we grab the highlights where it differed, because that's what we're looking for. The reason we can park someone like Hayley Razzo and separate her is because her story very clearly says the answer to our question today, is, well, you kind of can become a professional, but I tell you what, everyone's involved. It's the whole family and mum hustling to make ends meet.
Yeah, it's definitely about dedication and sacrifice for sure. Having those inspiring stories from great role models like Hayley Rasso is great for the upcoming athletes and the aspiring athletes across all sports, I think, to look
Mm,
to and give them hope, and go, okay, well, we can do this, and parents and give the parents hope as well. I think one of the most worldwide known examples out of the US is Serena and Venus Williams. And how
yeah.
much heart and dedication they had to put into it, how much sacrifice from the parents themselves
Yep.
to forge, arguably to become the greatest tennis players of all time. It's an incredible story. And there's so
Mm,
many stories like that. And I think about, going back to tennis, I think about how in a lot of sports, a lot of the prize money and the earnings is so stacked to the top 10 players.
mm,
And so it's really an investment. When you have this awareness that, okay, this child is passionate about this sport and they want to keep playing. So I need to keep investing
mm.
in my child to provide that for them. Or maybe it's that, okay, my child really does have a look at going down that professional pathway. So,
Mm,
now this is an investment. You may not see any return on that investment ever, or it might
yeah.
happen if they do make it into the top 10. So it's, yeah, you're sort of diving all in.
You raised so many good points then about like if this is the investment, then as adults, every day we're making investment choices. Are we putting it here or are we putting it there?
Yeah.
And if here is the potential for the whole family to get ahead in some way, it's a financial investment in something that looks like, pick the standard stuff, property or stocks or whatever. And in the other camp, the there here or the there is the child who's a potential athlete in the making, eventually going forward to do something spectacular, to be the 1%. You, you can see the strain for a parent, but then you see it differently in different sports, that there are multiple streams in different sports that you can take until you hit the point where you're being picked up and some of your costs are being covered. But it takes a while. It takes a lot of outlay before you get there. And then in other streams and some of the more, the tennis and the gymnastics and those things where there's a lot of money and everyone's running those paths, until you hit the point where you're either top 10 or you're everyone else. I reckon as a parent, it's a cruel question. It's a really cruel question. I feel like to even have to ask, do your parents need to be rich for you to become a professional athlete, is half the problem with sport, right?
Exactly. The fact that we're even asking this question means that it is an issue, you know?
I, what I am grateful for, and I'll say this to the people listening from some of these areas, I'm grateful that my children are not interested in equestrian. I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful that they're not sailing. I'm grateful for that because I'm grateful that they enjoy snow sports, but they're not pursuing them as a
Mm,
career,
mm,
because there are then those areas, right? To be good in those areas must just be cruel from a
yeah.
parent's perspective, to see your kid with talent on a horse and think, oh my, for us to do that for you requires something else of this family. And we just don't know how to do it. And you do, from time to time, you hear the stories of people packing up their lives to chase their children around so that they can get access to these things. But, I'm grateful that it's not a horse or a boat.
Yes, definitely. Low cost for the ones to encourage here. But
You
then so
know that?
saying, there's swimming, right? And my heart
Yeah.
to every person who swim, whether you have made it or you have not. What
Hmm.
a tough slog. The early hours, the demanding schedule, and then I mean, it's no secret that there's not a lot of money to be made
Yeah.
in swimming. You
Yeah.
look at the pinnacles of the sport, and we're talking about like the Olympics,
Yeah.
and so a lot of the swimmers are balancing full-time jobs or study and basically a plan B, which is really working alongside their plan A
Mm,
of forging their career in that sport,
mm,
and how much of a not only a financial strain that is, but also a emotional strain that is, and
mm,
time consuming to make that
mm.
happen.
And I know today we're talking about the financial elements of it,
Yeah,
but what you've raised there
I
is such
digress.
an important thing. Well, it's not even a digression, because what you're raising is those people are professionals
Yeah,
that are, going to the Olympics. That is professional in swimming. We know their names, their household names, for we get behind them in the pool at these big events. But what we don't spend time contemplating is how they're surviving, what they're doing to make ends meet. And you raise the point about the early starts in swimming, and a piece of me goes, yeah, that's cruel. But if they start any later, how do they survive? How do
mm,
they fund what they need to fund? And whether that's them as someone who's paying for themselves and they're needing to work alongside it, as you mentioned, or whether it's the parents who need them to swim before mum and dad go to work.
yeah,
They need to get the training in so that they can go and make the money to keep the family ticking along, keep the roof over their head, put the fuel in the car, and get them to the places they need to go. The next stage for me is the one that you've already touched on, is when you're paying for it yourself as an athlete. And I think about that really critical moment, and it feels like a long window when you're raising teenagers, but that really critical moment, which is actually a short window in the scheme of their life, of when they begin to become aware of the cost, not just financial, but definitely that, but the cost of the time to continue this pursuit to being the 1%. And they then become aware of how many people are better than me, and is 1% even realistic? And I reckon there's that separation in the path that they're taking at that point, that says, all of my friends are making money now and they're saving for their first car. My parents are putting everything into my sport, and no one, not me nor them, is saving for my first car, because
Yeah.
my spare hours that aren't school and study are this sport, and mum and dad's spare hours that aren't them working are chasing me with this sport. So no one is contributing to what I'm watching everyone around me start to deliver, start to pay
Yes.
for, have
Yeah.
the money for their own clothes, their cool shoes, the new phone, and again, that big milestone of getting your first car. And suddenly that becomes the next pile on for mum and dad to consider is, well, we don't want them to miss out on that. And the kids oftentimes take the path that says, I'm probably not going to make the 1%. I'll call it now. And those
Yeah.
teenage years when we're losing these kids in sport is just the cruelest thing to witness.
I think that's such a good point. The discipline it takes to choose, right? To make that choice, regardless of whether you stay with the sport or you don't stay with the sport, you've already dedicated so much to it. Facing that very real question of, I might not actually get any return on my own investment as the player until much further in the future, or do I make that choice now and say, okay, well, I need the instant return.
Mhm.
I have to stop for whichever reason. And, it's so financially driven a lot of the time. Do I have to stop now because I need to be earning for
Mm,
something that I know is going to pay off rather than
mm.
something I'm hoping is going to pay off in the future?
And and their self-esteem is already low, right, in those periods, typically the lowest from their experience to date. And when it can be just that one interaction that couldn't be funded, it can be that the other kids are going to that specific training camp for the summer or for this specific school holidays or a clinic or a whatever, and that is just one step too far for my parents or parent in lots of cases, then how does a pay to play system produce professional athletes if they're not well funded? I don't
Yeah.
know if it can. That's
Yeah.
why we talk about Haley Razzo. The interesting thing is, and you would have a great insight to this, but as you're climbing and you are doing well and you have been able to, that parents or whoever, everyone's family dynamic is different, but someone has funded you to a point where you're getting the training you need. What then is the gambit of expenses you need to factor? Because, I think about, if you're getting the support you need to recover faster than I can, then you've already got a head start.
Yeah.
What are those, what needed to wrap around you to make the best positioning for you each morning as an athlete?
Well, I mean, that is the tough question, because from a financial perspective, if you're able to fund it, like if you do
Mm,
have that wealth, if your parents are wealthy enough or you have somehow accumulated enough wealth, the further you advance in your chosen sport, the more people you need around you, like you're saying, right? So that's when you
mm,
start needing, okay, I need my coach traveling with me, or
mm.
I need a
Yeah.
hitting partner. If it's in tennis, I need that person with me. I need so many racket restrings, so I need to take so many rackets and so much string with me to the tournament. Or, and every sport has their own set of needs. For
Yeah.
the player has their own set of needs in that sport, and
Uh,
so that there, like, say you've spent all of this time training, and okay, that you have a shot, you have a chance, but you can't afford the coach to come with you, or maybe you can't afford to go overseas and play that tournament. What then? And I think that's the
Mhm.
tough spot too, is realistically taking that time, and often in those early teenage years, you might only be 14 having to juggle these very adult questions, really.
Mm.
Is this affordable? Can I manage this? Is this even
Mm.
doable? Can my parents afford this? Yeah,
And we can talk about avenues of funding and things like sponsorship and scholarship and pathways. The reality is that is subsidy, right? In most situations, it's not coverage. It's not picking up all of those things, but there is still the element that says the athlete that has access to funds should be able to do this easier. The athlete that has access to money should be able to access nutrition advice and strength and conditioning advice and, you know, physiotherapy and recovery and take their hitting partner and, and perhaps even travel more comfortably and have a better chance at recovering faster from travel. I don't know. I'm finding it difficult to say the answer's not obvious. Do your
yeah.
parents need to be rich? You know?
There's a there's a classic example that I witnessed during my years of playing across various sports, watching friends play sports, and there was this one family who they'd show up every week in their Ferrari, and they would be in every single tournament. You knew they'd be in every single tournament.
Mm,
And then there was another person who would maybe show up to six a year, but the six that they showed up to that year, they'd do very well in. That
mm.
they saved and they put everything they could into those. But the person who came from the very wealthy family, they would make it only so far in the tournament, but they made it only so far in the tournament so many times that their ranking was climbing so much faster than the person that was playing only six, but doing better in those tournaments. And so I think
Right.
about the amount of, I don't want to say talent because it's not always talent, it's a lot of developed skill, but the amount of great athletes that, thanks to those financial strains, weren't able to climb the rankings enough to achieve their goal.
Yeah, they're not even climbing enough to have themselves on the radar of people who might actually start to financially supplement them.
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh, that is cruel. That is so cruel. I was looking at a stat recently and I'm trying to make sure that I quote it properly. But it was saying that in the US, for example, 7% of college athletes come from low income families. And you would say that does not reflect the population, you know?
Yeah.
But it very seemingly reflects the likelihood of how they'll end up in a professional sporting atmosphere.
I think as well, I'm not sure exactly if those stats are drawn from the NCAA
Yeah.
or from the NAIA, but I know that a lot of the times athletes, particularly really Australia to the US, are looking at those scholarship opportunities to be able to provide themselves with a little more longevity in the sport, or perhaps open up some
Mm,
other avenues to, progress through the sport. And I
mm.
think a lot of the times, unless they are able to have accumulated a ranking and grades in school that get them into an NCAA, you know, 1, 2, or 3 division college with a great scholarship, then a lot of the times they're going into maybe the NAIA route. And so,
Right,
or they're taking a slightly different route. So I think
right.
that that statistic would change a little depending on which college band or
Yeah,
bracket, I guess, for want of a better term, they're looking at. Uh,
yeah. Do you know the key takeaway in what you said then was that they're taking a different route?
yeah,
'Cause isn't that then the summary
it
of
is.
what we're talking about, right?
Yeah,
It is possible that you can become a professional athlete if your parents are not rich or someone who is rich is not part of your funding lever by taking a different route.
yeah. I think that summarizes it perfectly.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess the thing that I would reflect on is what is the impact then of financial stress on that athlete and their talent anyway.
Yeah.
What a distraction. What a distraction from people we'll probably never know about because they just never got the avenue.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it?
Look, I'll say it here. Almost Pro does not begrudge those who are in the position. But I
Mm,
think what we reflect on is those that will never get to meet or perhaps become an Almost Pro story on the basis that finance wasn't on their side.
yeah. Thanks for tuning in to Almost Pro and this week's episode. Do your parents need to be rich to make it in sport? We'd love to hear your thoughts. And additionally, which sport do you think is the most expensive to pursue? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to like, follow, and share at Almost Pro Podcast to stay up to date with the latest episodes and help us bring these amazing Almost Pro stories into the spotlight. From Francis and me, have a great week, and we'll see you next time.